All right. Good morning, afternoon, and or evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am back at it again with another video, trying to distract myself from the horror that is Russell Wilson maybe going to the Bears, even though he hasn't demanded a trade from Seattle. But look, that pairing of Russell Wilson, who throws one of the prettiest fade balls ever, and Allen Robinson, that haunts my nightmares already. Anyways, let's get going. So, a few days ago, or about a week ago now, I was on the hellscape known as Twitter, and I saw a really, really weird stat. There are only two receivers in NFL history to have a 1,000-yard season for four different franchises, and those are Brandon Marshall and Brandin Cooks. The big difference between those two is essentially their pace. It took Brandon Marshall 10 seasons to accomplish that, doing so at the age of 31 with the Jets. Brandin Cooks, however, is a whole 4 years younger than that. He's still only 27 years old and has played 7 seasons in the NFL and has already accomplished that incredible feat, to be honest. So that got me to thinking, wow, Brandin Cooks has had a really, really weird career. And he has. You can't really deny that. Especially for a receiver who, if you just look at numbers, has had fantastic production. In 7 NFL seasons, he's had 5 over 1,000 yards. That's production of a very, very good receiver. Well, it seems to not matter either way because Brandin Cooks has been traded 4 times. He's never really stayed at any one team for longer than 3 seasons. So let's get into it. This is going to be a bit of a quick career breakdown, if you will, of Brandin Cooks, and then my own little theory of why he has been passed around like a blunt. All right. And without further ado, roll the intro. I don't really have a good intro right now, but on this channel I like to talk sports. Brandin Tawan Cooks was born on September 25th, 1993, in Stockton, California. After his father tragically passed away from a heart attack when Brandin was only 6, it was up to his mother to raise him and his 3 brothers. So shout out to all of them for getting through that. Early on, his mother put him into every sport she could find a sign-up sheet for to keep him out of trouble. Naturally, what he really began to take to early was football, especially as he entered high school. Playing in the Stockton area for the Lincoln High Trojans, Brandin would not only just play football, but also basketball and track. He didn't start at receiver until his sophomore year, but in that first year he had 600 yards and 7 touchdowns. His junior year would be a lot better, going for 46 passes for 783 yards and 10 touchdowns, along with 3 interceptions as a defensive back. Then, in the senior season, he would have the best year of his high school career, 66 receptions for 1,125 yards and 11 touchdowns. That managed to leapfrog him all the way up to the 24th ranked wide receiver in the 2011 class by Rivals.com. Of course, even with so-so production in high school, all things considered, he was a very, very, very fast man, which really added to that. Cooks would verbally commit to USC, but then later on change his mind, committing in full to Oregon State. In his freshman year, which was 2011, Cooks would have a okay season, 391 yards and 3 touchdowns on an Oregon State team that went 3-9. The next year, however, was really his breakout campaign. In his sophomore year, Cooks had 1,151 yards and 5 touchdowns, along with 5 receiving games of 100 yards or more. Oregon State went 9-3 that year, would be number 20 in the AP poll, but then lose to Texas in the Alamo Bowl, 31-27. Now, if his sophomore year was him stepping into the scene, his junior year was him skyrocketing all the way into the spotlight. Despite Oregon State being only 7-6 but winning the Hawaii Bowl that season, Cooks demolished the competition. 1,730 yards receiving, 8 touchdowns at 13 and a half yards a reception. His 128 receptions were the most in the season by an Oregon State receiver, by far, shattering the previous record of 91. He was held under 100 yards only 4 times that year and exceeded 200 yards twice. He also added in 217 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. He would win the Biletnikoff Award, be first-team All-Pac-12, and be a consensus All-American. Both his receptions and receiving yards records were Pac-12 records. After that year of 1,900 combined yards and 10 total touchdowns, there was no reason for him to go back to Oregon State. He would declare for the NFL draft. He finished his Oregon State career second all-time in receptions, third in receiving yards, and first in receiving touchdowns. Also, it is also worth noting that he also ran track at University of Oregon and finished second place in the 60-meter at the UW International. After running a 4.33 40-yard dash at the Combine, and combined with the fact that he wasn't even 21 yet, Cooks' stock would be raised even higher, as the potential of an elite, franchise-changing vertical threat was there. A guy that could be around for a very, very long time. Yes, I see the irony. That was planned. The team that would take a chance on him that year would be the New Orleans Saints, trading up from their 27th overall pick to 20th, exchanging a first and a third with the Arizona Cardinals to move up. They would select Cooks with that 20th overall pick, naturally, to be the sort of heir apparent to an aging and less productive Marcus Colston. Cooks' first year in the NFL would be solid. He would catch 53 passes for 550 yards and 3 touchdowns, while adding on 7 rushes for 73 yards and another touchdown. It was a solid rookie season overall, and with Marcus Colston certainly not getting younger, the Saints would make the big move. They confirmed that in the offseason, in the next year, 2015, Cooks would be their number 1 guy. In his sophomore year, Cooks would really step up, with 84 receptions for 1,138 yards and 9 touchdowns. He led the Saints in all 3 of those categories: receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns. Well, I mean, it didn't mean a whole ton because the Saints weren't all that good. They would go 7-9 that season, but you know what? The potential was still there. And going into 2016, the hype around Cooks was real. He was considered a top breakout candidate by most major media sites and by most fans as well. Building off of that great season in 2015, he would do essentially the same thing. There wasn't really much of a difference. He would grab 78 passes for 1,173 yards and 8 touchdowns. It's still a good season, mind you, especially considering the fact that his overall targets dropped from 129 to 116, but everyone expected more. Everyone did. And that led to the first major trade. The first time Cooks had to pack up and move in his NFL career was when, in 2016, the Saints traded him to the New England Patriots. The trade consisted of New Orleans, who gave up Cooks and a 4th-round pick in exchange for a first and a third from New England. It is worth noting that those 2 picks that they got from the Patriots ended up being Ryan Ramczyk and Trey Hendrickson. Ramczyk has been an elite tackle ever since he stepped foot in the Big Easy, and Trey Hendrickson, after being a solid rotational guy, had a breakout season last year. But at the time, though, there weren't any major repercussions for that trade. At the time, that is. New England wanted some more offensive firepower. They were coming off of 28-3, which they probably wouldn't have been that down in the first place if they had a dominant outside threat at receiver, which they wanted Cooks to be. Cooks was still very young, 23 years old, on a very cheap rookie deal, and they needed some firepower. It seemed like a real win for New England. In his first season with the Pats, Cooks would have 65 receptions for 1,082 yards and 7 touchdowns. Cooks and Rob Gronkowski were the first 1,000-yard receiving duo that the Patriots had since 2011. The Pats, of course, made it all the way to the Super Bowl that year, but would lose 41-33 to the Philadelphia Eagles. Cooks actually didn't see a lot of action in the Super Bowl because, if you remember, he left early in the first quarter with a concussion. Second quarter. And after that kind of year, which was still a very, very good one, you'd think they'd want to keep Cooks around. Heck, they even picked up his 5th-year option. But they didn't. Cooks would be traded again, this time to the LA Rams. The trade would consist of the Pats giving up Cooks and the Rams giving up a 1st and a 4th round pick. The first round pick would end up becoming Isaiah Wynn, which he's been pretty good for New England as of late. But it also marked the second time in Cooks' career he was traded for an O-lineman, fun fact. The Rams would go ahead and sign Cooks to a large extension. 5 years, $81 million, with $50 million guaranteed. And when 2018 rolled around, Cooks was just another piece for that insanely high-powered offense. He would finish the year with 80 receptions for 1,204 yards and 5 receiving touchdowns, adding on 10 rushes for 68 yards and a TD as well. The Rams, of course, would go all the way to the Super Bowl, but then lose to the Patriots, ironically, in the most thrilling game in NFL history, 13-3. I say that in jest, but I actually really thought that Super Bowl was crazy fun and entertaining, even with the low score. But that's just me. Whatever. 2019 would be a very disappointing year for Cooks after a slate of injuries. In Week 3, he would be banged up and not be able to finish the game. And then, a short 2 weeks later, he would get another concussion and be forced to miss 2 more games. He was hobbled after that and was just never the same in that year. He finished the year with 42 catches for 583 yards and 2 touchdowns, all of which were the lowest total since his rookie season. And with the money he was making already being a massive burden on a team that was super strapped for cap, the Rams began to look to move him. The team that would absorb that deal would be the Houston Texans. The Texans, who had just recently completed one of the worst trades in recent memory to get rid of DeAndre Hopkins, thought his replacement as a dominant outside threat with great body control and physicality in the red zone would be 5'10" Brandin Cooks. But that's neither here nor there. The Texans would end up paying a second and a fourth round pick. That second round pick became wide receiver Van Jefferson, who played very well in the snaps he got this year, but he didn't get a ton of snaps because LA has a stable of good receivers. Shout out Josh Reynolds, by the way, super underrated guy. On the field, though, Cooks had a very, very solid season. 81 receptions for 1,150 yards and 6 touchdowns. Well, but the Texans were still very, very bad, going 4-12. This, of course, was the season where he tied Brandon Marshall's record for being the second ever player to have a 1,000-yard receiving season for 4 different franchises. And that brings us to where we are today. Brandin Cooks, still only 27 years old. 5 1,000-yard receiving seasons to his name, but on his 4th different team. Whereas other receivers would go out and demand trades, recently Brandin said in an interview that he would not accept being traded again, which is just an interesting thing. And I think it really highlights the fact that even though they're NFL players making millions of dollars, all these guys are human. And all these guys want stability in their lives. And that's something that Brandin Cooks has not really had for most of his career. His longest stint with a team was 3 years when he was a rookie. Well, on a rookie deal. Now, the biggest question now is why? Why has he ended up being the accidental nomad of 1,000-yard receivers? I mean, we're not in those locker rooms, but from what I've seen in interviews and things with former teammates, there seems to be no real problem with him. He seems like a really humble, genuine dude who knows his upbringings, knows what his opportunity is, and is more than willing to work hard for it. But either way, he's never had a forever home, really. For one, this is just me, and this is more of just a feeling, and it's a very hard to quantify statistic, but I feel like a lot of people might think the same way. Brandin Cooks has never felt like a true number one receiver, quote unquote. And there's always that Willie Snead quote you can go off of, but I think you know what I mean by that. He puts up numbers, good numbers, yeah, but is his skill set really that of a guy you want leading a receiving corps for a decade or more? In New England, the guy there was always Rob Gronkowski first. And in LA, Robert Woods was the number one. Another super underrated guy. He's a guy football nerds absolutely love. But, of course, he was back to being the number one in Houston. But that was also because Houston's receiving corps was just not that good. Like, their other top 4 guys at receiver, not talking tight ends here, were an old and injured Randall Cobb, Kiki Cutie, and a younger and often injured Will Fuller. But there's also the matter of production. While, of course, he has had 5 1,000-yard seasons, he hasn't really been putting up, like, quote-unquote elite numbers. His highest yards total in the season was barely over 1,200. He's a guy that has a ceiling as a player currently. A real ceiling that teams know and teams just simply don't want to work around, I would say. Cooks, in my opinion, falls into a category of players I like to call the perennial pretty goods, where essentially all you can really say about them is, oh yeah, they're pretty good. They're a tier or two below the elites or the very goods, and there's of course reasons that they stay in the NFL, they stay making money, but there's not a reason for them to stay all that long when you can get someone much cheaper who does something similar and for, a fraction of the cost. Now, I know I may seem harsh with this, but that doesn't mean I'm not pulling for Brandin Cooks. In fact, doing the research for all these videos really makes me pull for the guys that are the subjects of these videos. And I really, really hope Brandin Cooks finds that forever home. He's still only 27. That's in the prime of his career. And there's a lot of teams out there who have a good bit of cap and have a contending roster, or simply put, can just clear some cap. Cooks is making $12 million a year, which is a fair bit of money. But if you're a team that needs receiver help, and I can think of a good few, and with the Texans rebuilding, they're more likely going to end up becoming a contract dump team that's looking for picks. There's a lot of teams out there that could use Cooks' help. And I hope one of them goes out there and finds him. And I hope he stays there for the rest of his career. Because at the end of the day, the NFL is a business. But I also think at the end of the day, if you want to find a place where you want to settle down for the rest of your days, you go find that place. And I hope Brandin Cooks finds that in the very near future. And that is it for this video. I know it's probably going to end up being a shorter one, but hey, probably not going to do as many long 20-ish minute videos anymore. Well, not for a while at least, because a college application process has started, and I'm going the community college route because luckily in Virginia it's super easy to transfer. But you know what? Yeah, I have this YouTube channel thing is more of just a hobby that I do because I like talking at people about sports. And yeah, after that little tangent, like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And I am out for now. Deuces.